Hi, I'm Ashok Khosla, and I'm chairman of Development Alternatives, a social enterprise with its headquarters in New Delhi. Our mission is to eradicate poverty and regenerate the health of the environment.
Ashok Khosla chairs the board of Development Alternatives Group. It was among the first civil society organizations set up to address the issues of sustainable development as a whole. It also pioneered the concept of social enterprise, creating business-like approaches for eradicating poverty and conserving the natural resource base.
Ashok Khosla truly believes someone's trash is another's treasure.
A waste material?
This is trash. In the United States, we would call this trash.
Well, we're converting it into cash.
He has taken an active part in the policy and decision-making bodies of many of the largest environmental organizations of the world, and has been the co-chair of the United Nations International Resource Panel and was the president of the International Union for Conservation of Nature and president of the Club of Rome. My guest today is Dr. Ashok Khosla, the pioneer in starting environment education at the university level internationally. Dr. Khosla has held various key positions and have been also the president of the IUCN. Ashok, thanks a lot for joining our program today and coming over to the Primenews studios. Thank you very much and a warm welcome to you.
Thank you for inviting me.
Well, Ashok, whenever I talk about you, it reminds me of the days 1964. You are the person who took the initiative to start environment as a subject at the university level, and that too not nationally, internationally. Please tell us something more about that.
Well, it wasn't me alone. I was 24 years old at the time. It was the professor, a very, very eminent professor, one of the giants of science in the 20th century, Professor Roger Revelle. He was the person who discovered climate change. The original paper was written by him. He was a professor at Harvard, and he and I were good friends, and one day we were sitting and talking about these issues, and he said, why don't we start a course? So it became the first course. It was a very well-known course. Large numbers of students used to come, and for many years I taught it. It was the course which Al Gore took his first exposure to the environment, and Benazir Bhutto was one of our students. She was called Pinky in those days. So there were many young people who later on became very eminent in their respective fields who took this course. So it was very influential. And it covered, funnily enough, not just environment, but development issues. So it was already long before sustainable development became a term, was already considering the issues that we today now see as being intertwined. Environment, development, ecology, improvement, progress are all interconnected.
Okay, but Ashok, you lay a lot of stress on sustainable development. What is it all about? This is the main focus of your work right now. In fact, the organization where you are associated, where you hold the position of the chair and the board, you all are talking in terms of sustainable development. Development for whom and how?
Exactly. It is really, the whole question revolves around the who, the how, the what, and in a sense where, because it's very different for the North, for industrialized countries, and very different for the South, the poor emerging economies. In the early 80s, environment was really about wildlife, about pollution, about chemicals in the environment, about penguins, about things that mattered to the North. In the early 80s, I was involved with a large number of global initiatives, including an initiative by IUCN called the World Conservation Strategy, where I found it necessary, from my experiences in India, to inject into sustainability the issues of society, of equity, of eradicating poverty. And this was not familiar territory for most of the people in the North. And so we coined the word sustainable development as a way of bringing together both ecology and society into the economic equation.
True. Your organization also focuses a lot on social enterprises. It's altogether innovative term, I would say, and very new to the existing system. Please tell us more about it.
Well, it's 30 years ago when I set up Development Alternatives, after having worked in the UN and in government and in university. I came to the conclusion that the problems of the poor and even some of the problems of the environment were not tackleable by the existing systems. Governments have other responsibilities, mainly setting the frameworks, the legal systems, the regulatory systems, and so on. But they don't create jobs. They're not really responsible for the kinds of things that need to be done for the environment. They can legislate, but they can't do. Business, of course, is in the business of making money. They're not even interested. But they're not even mandated to do anything about eradicating poverty. So the only people left are the civil society, the NGOs, the voluntary organizations, and so on. So I came to the conclusion that while the NGOs were well-intentioned, they never had the scale. There was no way for them to get to the numbers that were involved, given the fact that there were hundreds of millions of people who didn't have jobs, who didn't have adequate food.
Basically, the business approach you're talking about, eradicating poverty.
So I felt that you could devise new kind of institutions that had social objectives, environmental objectives, but business-like methods. And so that I called a social enterprise. Now, of course, the term is quite well known. It has now been adopted by the World Economic Forum in Davos, and everybody talks about social enterprise. But 30 years ago, ours was the first.
You were the pioneer.
Yes, worldwide. And it's been quite remarkable that in those 30 years, of course, we could have done a lot more, I suppose, but we've been able to demonstrate that this is a model that actually works.
Ashok, I was seeing all your profiles and the biodatas, and everywhere I was going through. One thing I had seen that everywhere the tag of poverty is associated. Well, I would like to, I would like to know from you any personal reasons. You seem to be very much affected with the people, under the poverty line, I would say.
There were probably two lines of thought. I was originally a refugee from Lahore, but where did I end up? In my grandparents' home in Kashmir. And then I was a refugee again a month later from when the Pakistani raiders arrived. So I had to walk all the way to Jammu to Delhi to get away. During that period, I saw a lot of distress, a lot of mad sort of handling of human beings. And that left me with a very deep impression that suffering of that kind was not acceptable. The other part was that I wanted to be a proud Indian. I always was abroad for much of my younger life, and I had the choices of staying there, but my feeling was that I'm an Indian and I want to be in India, and I want to be a proud Indian. And the one thing that really made it difficult for me to do that was the existence of so much poverty and deprivation. So I've always really found it unacceptable as an Indian to be from a country that has this kind of poverty.
True. A lot of emotion attached to what you say. Being a refugee, coming all the way, losing his own place. I understand. You go through, and I think that always stays as an impact in whatever you do later on.
Yes.
You also stress a lot on conserving natural resources, Ashok. What is it all about?
Well, that's more the scientist in me, I suppose. I've been president of the Club of Rome, which 40 years ago was the first organization to put up the flag about resource depletion. It's an organization that I've worked with for a long time, and I got insights from the kind of work we did on what happens when we start running out of energy and water and material resources. Today, for example, we're running out of phosphates. And you can't grow food without phosphates. So I worry about the world that we're going to leave behind for our children, where there's going to be a problem of growing food. Sure. And with 7 billion people now, maybe 8, 9 billion towards...
Population is growing day by day.
And more and more people eating meat and other kinds of food products. I wonder how this is going to match. There's no way to bring the two together. So I got very heavily involved into the issues of resources, partly because of my problem with poverty. Because the two really basically relate and go together. The problem of poverty is the lack of access to resources.
True.
So I've been chairing a large UN body called the International Resource Panel, which is like the IPCC, but not for climate change, for resources. Okay. So I chair that with a German colleague. The two of us co-chair it, and it has been a revelation. I mean, we've written reports on biofuels, on metals, on water, on all the various kinds of resources, and frankly, within 200 years, humanity has been able to get to a stage of depleting these, which for 4 billion years never happened before. And all of a sudden, we're looking at a cliff in front of us.
Right. If I'm right, you all are the first governmental organization in a developing country?
Well, when I came back from Harvard University after I taught that course that I was talking about, I was asked by Mrs. Gandhi to set up the agency. It was called the National Committee on Environmental Planning and Coordination in her office. So I reported to her. She was the minister, basically, and she was setting up what became a ministry a few years later, because there was the Stockholm Conference, the first UN conference. So I was the head of that. I founded it and I set it up, and I worked there for 5 years before I went away to the UN for another 5 years.
Right. So basically, this was one position you held, what you were telling, when Mrs. Gandhi had invited you and said that you have to head this. But apart from that, a lot of key positions you have held. Let us not forget that you have been the president of IUCN, and IUCN has a lot of relevance as far as I think this part of the country is concerned. The northeastern region, we are very much concerned about it. Could you share about some of your experiences you had? I mean, if I talk in terms of the positions you had held, it would be, heaping accolades. But let us talk about the important positions you had held.
I've been associated with IUCN for very long, for 30 odd years, and I became president of it 5 years ago for a period of 4 years. And during that period that I was associated with it, I think I had a great deal of impact on the conservation community to bring them around to the fact that you cannot really save species or ecosystems unless you also make them meaningful for people. So I was able to bring people into the equation much more than was normally the case. This doesn't mean that conservation in itself is not important. It's simply that in a practical way, if you're going to achieve it, then you have to have reasons why society is willing to pay for it and support it. In fact, the conservation strategy, the World Conservation Strategy I mentioned, where we coined the word sustainable development, was basically a gesture towards that, to show that conservation needed both direct action in protecting areas, in saving species, but also indirect action by reducing the pressures on nature, by making people's lives better, by reducing the rate of population growth, human population growth. So these are all things that had to do with development. So I was reasonably influential, I think, over those last 30 years in trying to make the conservation community more aware of the human issues.
With this, we take a short break, but we'll be back right away to talk more with Dr. Ashok Khosla about his life, about his achievement. So please stay with us. Ashok, coming to this topic of biodiversity, which we were talking some time back, if you think in terms of conservation of biodiversity, this part of the country, it's a biodiversity hotspot, the Northeast. What are the conservation measures which should be taken? Do you think it should be at par with whatever is taken in the rest of the country and outside, or for Northeast we should adopt some other policy?
No, the policies have to be at base, at its roots, the same. You have to reduce the pressures on biodiversity. You have to find ways to nurture it and make the economy realize that it's dependent on it, and so on. So ecosystem services and valuing them and making sure that the systems of governance nurture them and so on, as much as protecting areas, putting fences around where you have to, but also removing the incentives to threaten species and habitats. These are all things that are the same everywhere. It's not just all over the country, all over the world. We would have to have similar policies in terms of the general principles. But when you apply principles to a specific area, then obviously things have to be looked at differently. A large part of the threats to the Northeast are from things like logging, from mineral exploitation, particularly energy resources, plus the whole question of specific species like the rhino and so on. Now there, you do have to have a certain understanding that you've got to pay some of those costs. Somebody has to pay some of the costs. And if the whole country is benefiting from the northeastern region doing something, then it should contribute towards that. If the northeastern region alone is benefiting, then it has to find ways to justify that within its own budget. But let us say that, take the rhino for example.
Tremendous amount of, the rhino horns are in tremendous demand in the Southeast Asian countries.
And you just pointed out to the issue that I was raising. Then in that case, it becomes important for the Northeast to persuade the central government and its diplomats and its foreign office to persuade the people who are basically the source of demand for the wildlife parts, rhino horn and all the tiger
bones and whatnot,
and so on, to back off. Now this is where international conventions come into being. For example, CITES, the Convention on International Trade.
But the issues were taken in a number of meetings held. But finally, in reality, we did not see anything happen.
Overall, let's not say nothing happened. It may have been even worse without them. We don't know. But what we do know is that not enough has happened.
Not enough. Right?
So now I think we have to keep raising the bar all the time. And our governments have not taken these things, particularly at the central level, but even the state levels, taking these things quite as seriously as they should. We do have to persuade people elsewhere who are causing the problem that they must stop doing that. Now, push comes to shove, do you go to war with these countries? Probably not.
Something needs to be done at the international level,
Absolutely.
I think, where both the countries sit down together, send an advisory, and perhaps work on that rather than...
And it's not as easy as that, because they've been doing that, and it's still not happened yet. But I think that we are building up a huge pressure, a people's movement that will, in fact, start showing results, I hope, very soon. It may be too late in the case of some species. I mean, I don't say that we've succeeded in any meaningful way yet, but we have to keep working on it.
Even the elephants, you see, they are also a threat.
Absolutely.
So, this is really alarming, the situation, in fact. Ashok, another thing I feel is that, there has been tremendous climatic change also in this region. If you see what used to be the weather here, we talk in terms of the weather in Kaziranga, there has been tremendous rise in temperature.
You noticed that?
Yes, and not only that, let us talk about other tourist hotspots like Cherrapunji. Those were people used to love, but now there has been increase in the temperature, and the effect due to what is indiscriminate felling of trees. There is a Supreme Court ban on felling of trees, but despite that, felling of trees goes on. Timber is being smuggled to the neighboring countries. Timber come from there. What do you think about this trend? I mean, is this time I think we all should raise our consciousness? I mean, it's the consciousness.
No question doesn't arise. You are absolutely right. I mean, we have to transform social thinking in many of these areas. But I do have to say that most of the issues that you've been talking about are illegal. They are not being promoted or even being accepted by society as a whole or by governments. These are things that are criminal, and they are, after all, 3 or 4 of the biggest trades in the world are illegal trades.
Absolutely.
Illegal trades in armaments, illegal trades in human beings, illegal trades in drugs, and illegal trades in wildlife parts. These are huge operations, and the same people are involved in all of them. So
Ultimately, it's a group, yeah?
yeah, it's a mindset and a group. So and they feed on each other. The people who basically export wildlife parts are then earning money with which they buy arms, with which then they go and excite terrorists and
Absolutely,
other things.
absolutely,
So
yeah.
it's all mixed up. It's in nobody's interest to let it continue. Nobody's. No legitimate persons, except the ones who are really making money. And I think that the people of our country as a whole have to now get up and say to government, this is all unacceptable. We are not prepared to put up with this kind of thing for any longer. Please. So Supreme Court's rulings are not enough, because they can say what they like, but they don't actually have the means to
And
stop.
again, there's another problem is that there are certain areas where we have typical system. The land belongs to the people. So those also has to be taken into consideration. Ashok, let's drift away from this topic. Your organization has been able to provide 1 million jobs, indirectly affecting and helping 6 million people. I mean, I won't say that you alone or your organization. It's a combined effort.
Yeah.
It's an issue which really touches your heart. You people getting involved, and today's in the world of unemployment, I think this is the greatest thing which an organization can do. How was it possible? What was the policy
we
you
set
had
out
adopted?
30 years ago with the mission of our organization, Development Alternatives, was to create sustainable livelihoods. That was our mission. And our strategy and our goal, in a sense, was to create sustainable livelihoods in very large numbers. Not a few, not to take care of a couple of villages.
Everyone has the feeling that something positive has come.
And exactly. And the only way you can do that is to develop models that people will buy into, that other people will then say, that suits us, let's do it. And that is the market. So we started out very early in the game, much to the concern of our fellow NGOs and voluntary organizations and so on, saying the market isn't all bad. We've got to use it to our advantage, but a marketplace based on human principles and on equity and fairness and justice can actually provide the incentives for small entrepreneurs in small villages to satisfy basic needs, also create jobs. So we've done that, and we've done it by setting up models other people can follow. So what happens is that we were essentially thinking always from the beginning, not how to sell something and make money out of it, but how to develop something that people would buy and then create more and more replicable models.
It's the policy you have to keep in your mind.
It's like franchising.
Right.
You know, you basically
what we call the chain marketing sort
precisely.
of.
So we've been doing that, and the British government, we've done nearly 600 projects over the last 30 years as an organization. One of those projects, admittedly a large one, was funded by the British government.
Okay.
And that was over 5-6 years to develop a whole network of NGOs in northern India, in the 100 poorest districts of India, as specified by the Planning Commission, which we did. And when the British government did its evaluation, they said that about 6 million people were empowered by this one project. So that's where the 6 million people comes from. There are probably many, many more, but in that particular project, we had a huge impact on the lives of women who could learn to read and write, who could become members of the panchayat, who could get their entitlements, their pensions, and so on. So we were able to empower them in some way or other.
What an effort, I would say. But Ashok, you seem to be very much touched with poverty when we talk about poverty. In fact, if you come to this part of the country, also in the northeast, apparently, if you visit the cities, life is altogether different. But if you go to the interiors, there is enormous amount of poverty. Have you thought in terms of doing anything for these people in this part of the country?
Very
Has
much.
the thought occurred in your mind that
Yes.
to take up some projects?
More than once, in fact, all the time. In fact, before I came yesterday in this trip, I talked with my colleagues and said, what else can we do while I'm on this trip? Who else do you want me to meet? So on. Our job is not to come here and set up a whole new organization here. We want to strengthen the organizations that exist. We'd like partners who then will be doing
Who are already working in this field, perhaps.
And so on. And what we would like to do is to work with both entrepreneurs as well as NGOs who want to make building materials, who want to make toilets, who want to make little power stations, who want to make water systems, all of which we have technologies for. So what we would like to do is to be able to share these technologies with enterprises and societies, organizations that want to spread them throughout the Northeast.
Okay.
So we would love to do that.
Absolutely, and that's a very good news for our viewers from the Northeast.
If your viewers are interested, please tell them they contact me personally, and I'd be happy to respond.
Absolutely. Ashok, one thing I was always tempted to ask you, in fact, we were also discussing while we were having a cup of tea. Basically, you have been a student of physics, and suddenly, the subject has totally changed. It is a desire from your heart, or what is it? I mean, you talk in terms of environment today, you talk in terms of development today. The subject with which you deal really don't tally with the subject you had pursued your academics in.
Yeah, I did pursue for a long time, and it was because I loved doing physics. I mean, looking at how nature works was something that was really not only important and meaningful to me, it was a driving force. It just was something that I dreamt that I would be a scientist in a lab trying to understand how nature works. But I told you I had been a refugee, and I was always, unlike most people at the time I was at college and university, most Indians were going overseas trying to getting a green card or getting a citizenship in the US. I was one of the few who was always coming back because I'd never been here. So my real subject was not physics, but India. And I really wanted to be an intelligent citizen of India, a person who could help make better decisions, make a better national future for those around us, living people around us and our future generations. So to me, physics was extremely important but self-indulgent. It was something that was just for me. Whereas India was for everything, for the world.
So you stood for India.
And I basically stood for India, yes.
Well, on that note, Ashok, thank you very much for sparing your valuable time in spite of your busy schedule to come to our studios in Primenews and talk exclusively to us. Thank you very much. I wish you a longer life and greater success in the days to come, and best wishes from the entire team of Primenews.
Thank you. I've been very happy to be with you.